i detta avsnitt av Gränsland.
Listeners in Sweden might be very focused on the conflict in Gaza, but Israel, over the past 2 years, has been fighting Lebanon in the north, Syria in the east, Yemen, Iraq, Iran, and has achieved extraordinary successes against all of them. Truly astonishing things have happened, and we've seen this has inspired people religiously, especially stories of some of the hostages. Who, again, the hostages, it's important to understand, were taken from the most liberal and secular communities in Israel. The kibbutzim, which are communities with socialist roots, which were secular and were big supporters of the Palestinian cause. Many of the people who were murdered and kidnapped engaged in projects to bring Palestinians into Israel, to get them medical care. They were involved in various pro-Palestinian charities and interfaith understanding groups, and were killed literally by the same people who they worked with, who exploited their knowledge to help infiltrate the kibbutzim.
Welcome, Eugene Kontorovich. Is that right?
That's correct.
That's correct.
First time.
First time. Oh, first try. First try. Very welcome to my pod or on Epoch Times, and you're professor in international law.
That's correct. And constitutional law.
And constitutional law. Please just describe it, because you're born in Ukraine.
Yeah, well, not really. I was born in the Soviet Union. It was not Ukraine then, but I was born in Kiev, which is now capital of Ukraine, and was then capital of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. And I came to America with my family as a young boy in the 70s. And I was then educated at the University of Chicago, and went to college there and graduate school, and have been a professor ever since. I taught at Northwestern for a while, Northwestern University in Chicago, and now I have an affiliation at George Mason University. And but I spend most of my time in Israel, and also work for some think tanks and engage in public policy work. Right now I'm with the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C.
Okay. Very, very close link to the Republican Party.
They say.
They say. Well, so what we're going to just start out with is linked to the Republican Party, and it's one of the founders of President Trump in 2016, the billionaire and entrepreneur Peter Thiel. He contributed with $1.25 million in the primaries. He actually saved that campaign for Donald Trump. And he has written an essay which is called The Straussian Moment. And what is the Straussian Moment? And Peter Thiel says, well, my Straussian moment, where I had to kind of a moment that really questioned where, because he was a Democrat from the beginning. But it was 9/11 when he said, well, this way of thinking, this liberal, technocratic policies, it doesn't work. We have missed out the religious perspective. So for him and for that, the cluster around Stanford University became his Straussian moment from Leo Strauss, the thinker, the ideologist, Leo Strauss. And he says, well, for the United States, 9/11 was the Straussian moment where the United States woke up, and said, parts of the political landscape woke up and said, well, we really missed the religious perspective. That is, they kind of more abandon Francis Fukuyama's thesis about the end of history and the last man, this liberal, technocratic society, and put it, we have to have the religious and cultural perspectives as well. And for the U.S., the 9/11 was that moment. And what about Israel? You have always had a religious perspective on politics.
So Israel was founded as a Jewish state, and Israel's raison d'etre is to be a Jewish state. Interestingly, though, when we say Jewish state, there is no official religion So unlike, even Nordic countries where, I think not in Sweden, but in Norway, there's an official church, Judaism is not even the official religion of the State of Israel. People think it is. There is no official religion in the State of Israel. So it's Jewish it has always been Jewish in a cultural sense, but with a deep sense of historic and emotional and biblically based attachment. But the country was set up largely by secular people rooted in a European socialist and very statist tradition, but with still a deep intellectual attachment to, let's say, the biblical sources of Jewish peoplehood and the Jewish mission. So I think Israel has always understood the need for, let's say, a national identity that is rooted in some kind of tradition that is not seen as entirely man-made, but is seen as divine. Indeed, no one has a greater purpose for this than the Jewish people coming back to, why come back to Israel rather than some other place, unless you believe that there's a special divine mission. But the depth of that religious commitment, I think, has varied greatly. I think it's definitely the case that since October 7th, there has been a broad revival, even in Israel, which, again, one of the things about Israel is it is a fairly traditional, fairly spiritual country amongst Western countries. I think actually that explains much of the hostility of Europe in its bureaucratic incarnation. Europe not in the sense of the people of the continent, but certainly the European Commission. The Europe, in part, is based on an idea that a kind of John Lennon Imagine idea that we're going to put away our national identities, our religious beliefs that separated people and supposedly caused wars, and we're all going to kumbaya, join hands, and sing as we take wheelchair ramps up the Alps. And that's progress. So Israel has always been fairly committed to tradition, and I think and to a sense of national identity, even before October 7th, much more than most Western countries, certainly much more than America. And I think that's one of the things that's threatening for cosmopolitans, because it's not the cosmopolitans mind religion or nationalism. The proof is they're big supporters of a Palestinian state, which would be devoted to Islam and based on Palestinian exclusivism. The difference is the Palestinians they see in a kind of a Hegelian sense as being backwards or not yet there. Not yet. They've not achieved European sophistication. So you would expect. So nationalism and religious attachment is seen as okay for those who you regard as primitive. So when you see Israel, that's the startup nation, and they have this religious revival, this religious attachment, that's threatening, because the startup nation should be the most secular, rather than. Again, it's not a theocracy, and it is a secular state, but a secular state rooted in a particularistic understanding. That's a challenge now, and it has certainly become more so after October 7th. But I want to say there's a relationship between October 7th and 9/11, other than they're both acts of Islamic terror. So I just flew in from Oslo last night, and had some time to think about the Oslo Accords, which created this idea of the two-state solution. It didn't really exist as a political thing before. And one can understand why it was in Oslo and why it was in 1993. Because 1993 was a short, special moment in time between the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Twin Towers. That is to say, between the collapse of industrial totalitarian political models of the 20th century and the rise of political Islam and more backward-looking models. There was a 10-year window when, as Francis Fukuyama could think, history was over. Yeah. And sitting in Oslo, where your neighbors are the Swedes, one might think, wow, history, everything is fine now. And maybe, Norway and Sweden, they've had lots of differences over the years. And we can manage our differences with, our neighbors in Israel, just like the Norwegians and Swedes do. But in Israel, our neighbors are not Swedes. And that was if they had waited 8 years for the Oslo Accords, there'd be no Oslo Accords.
No.
Right? It couldn't have happened before because of the Soviet Union, and it couldn't have happened 8 years later. But Israel is still recovering from that because an entire generation invested their political credibility into this model. That model of the two-state solution has now been fully killed dead, along with all the other casualties of October 7th.
You can put it in between 93 and 2001. We had our Chamberlain moment. So to say, the Chamberlain era. I think just a brief comment on what you said about Judaism. You don't have a state religion, and I think from my point of view, and from many Jews interacting with, my point. I've actually studied Judaism and Islam and Christianity, and then I left all churches behind me. That's nothing for me. But when I'm looking on Judaism, it's not religion, it's a culture. It has many perspectives on Judaism, and what religion is one of them. But what I actually, and you kind of touched that now, that since 7th of October, the religious perspective has been more evident. Is that correct?
We see that as had happened before in Jewish history, the attempt to exterminate the Jews and the fairly miraculous things that have happened since then. That is to say, I think listeners in Sweden might be very focused on the conflict in Gaza, but Israel, over the past 2 years, has been fighting Lebanon in the north, Syria in the east, Yemen, Iraq, Iran, and has achieved extraordinary successes against all of them. Truly astonishing things have happened, and we've seen this has inspired people religiously, especially stories of some of the hostages. Who, again, the hostages, it's important to understand, were taken from the most liberal and secular communities in Israel. The kibbutzim, which are communities with socialist roots, were secular and were big supporters of the Palestinian cause. Many of the people who were murdered and kidnapped engaged in projects to bring Palestinians into Israel, to get them medical care. They were involved in various pro-Palestinian charities and interfaith understanding groups, and were killed literally by the same people who they worked with, who exploited their knowledge to help infiltrate the kibbutzim. So those people who were the leftist of the Israeli left, and they say they can't continue like that, obviously. But some of them, in the tunnels, started observing Jewish ritual observance under extraordinary circumstances, including people who did not really have much of a tradition of that, who did not had not personally been doing that, and they would observe Passover and the Sabbath in the tunnels. And those stories, when they came out, those that survived, have been truly inspirational, I think to the country, and shows exactly because it's these people who it was, the people who were not necessarily, they were not what you would call the religious right. They were what you'd call the secular left previously.
Can we see the rise of a religious left as well after 7th October? Because in Israel, part of the idea of Judaism is that it's a religion for all Jews. So we wouldn't say the religion, we would just say a deeper respect and appreciation for Jewish tradition amongst all sectors of society, regardless of political.
Yeah, I mean, this is not an absolute phenomenon, but one is seeing definitely again. Even in Israel, secular Jews have been much more traditional than their counterparts elsewhere in the West. For example, in Israel, a secular, college-educated professional woman will have 3 or more children. 3 is the average for secular women. That would be extraordinary pretty much anywhere else in the West. And part of that is because there's a sense of tradition, a sense of family, a sense of community.
Okay, that's interesting, because you don't actually hear a lot about this in Sweden. Being pro-Israel is actually being on the very far right from in Swedish politics since 2006, I think, when Göran Persson actually, please correct me, when he was defeated in the national elections. So that so what we're talking about, you have a more present religious perspective in Israel today. That's what I understand from you.
Again, these things are hard to measure and gradual, but one sees anecdotal evidence. And again, there's still many people that are secular. They say 2 Jews, 3 opinions.
I know.
So it's very hard to generalize about what the Jews think.
Okay, no. If you have 2 Jews, you have to build 3 synagogues.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But that leads me to one, really, and you can go as deep as you want to, and you can just because one big thing in the Swedish context is actually the policies regarding the settlers, and you can explain a little bit from your perspective as a professor in international law, what's right and what's wrong, and what's the Israeli motivation for this and that. So because your voice is never heard in Sweden.
Yeah. Right, so it's a big subject. What do we mean by the settlers? Because, of course, the term "the settlers" is already a term designed to problematize these people, to make them seem illegitimate and bad. Let me just give you some examples. I assume in Sweden there's not a big campaign against Azerbaijanis who are moving in to Nagorno-Karabakh, an area which Azerbaijan just took from Armenia in a war. Nobody calls those settlers. The majority of the population of northern Cyprus is what we'd call settlers from Turkey. But I don't see this to be a major issue in Sweden, even though this is a member of the European Union. This is not something far away. But in Israel, the situation is even more remarkable. So Jews lived in Jerusalem, in the old city of Jerusalem, from time immemorial, and they lived in the areas around it, Judea and Samaria. Indeed, Jews take their name from the hill country of Judea. And what happened during the War of Independence, so we know that Israel was created, Israel succeeded in securing its existence within certain borders. But Egypt and Jordan invaded to try to Molotov and Ribbentrop, meet in the middle and extinguish it. They didn't get to the middle, but they did take territory. And the territory taken by Egypt was called the Gaza Strip, became the Gaza Strip. And the West Bank never existed before 1948. It was simply that area of mandatory Palestine, the British Mandate of Palestine, that was occupied by Jordan in 1949. And when Jordan occupied it, here's what they did. They ethnically cleansed every single Jew. Every Jew was killed or expelled or taken prisoner and then traded back. So from 1949, there had been Jews there from time immemorial. From 1949, the place is Judenrein. 1967, Israel retakes this territory, which had never been a Palestinian state. Now, of course, we know that when it's under Arab control, you're not going to have Jews living there because they're not going to let them. And we can look throughout the Middle East. Countries governed by most Arab governments cannot have Jewish communities. But now it's under Jewish control. So the idea that they're settlers are simply Jews
returning,
living in those places that had been for 19 years ethnically cleansed by Jordan. So to say that the ethnic cleansing of Jordan creates a permanent result, eternal Judenrein status for the land, that even under Jewish control, a Jewish government must forcibly keep Jews, but not Arabs, because there's also Arab Israelis who do and can live in these places, needs to check its citizens when they're moving into Jerusalem. Oh, you're an Arab, you're an Arab Israeli, you can come. You're a Jewish Israeli, no. This place is now perpetually Jew-free. The old city of Jerusalem. So that's absurd. These are not colonies. These are not places far away. These are places literally next door, hundreds of meters away from any other place in Israel. And settlers are simply Jews, now hundreds of thousands of them, who happen to live in these places. Why do they live there? Because it's right there, right? It's not like going from Denmark to Greenland, right? It's like going around the block, literally. And of course, Jews used to live in these places, and many of the people who first returned were survivors of this. So settlers are just Jews living in places that the League of Nations 100 years ago specifically said should be open to Jewish settlement. Now, we understand that Arabs don't like having Jews live around them, but those kinds of views are typically called racist. Imagine if there was a neighborhood in Sweden and people didn't like when minorities moved in. You couldn't say, oh, you're upsetting the majority. That's not a valid perspective.
No, that's not politically correct. And actually, we have that situation today. We have this ghettoification north of Stockholm in Rinkeby, actually. That's another. But I think what you're telling me actually, and this is actually very well put, that what's happening on the West Bank is that Jews are returning after 19 years of Judenfrei.
Exactly. And let me tell you how I would expect the international community to react. We have an exact similar example that just happened. So there's a Nagorno-Karabakh. I know nobody wants to talk about Nagorno-Karabakh because it's boring, but you can only learn international law by looking at the things that are boring, not the things that issue lots of heat but little light, like Israel. So Nagorno-Karabakh was an area inside Azerbaijan that Azerbaijan had a legal claim to, very similar to Israel's claim to Judea and Samaria. But Armenia seized it upon their independence. And the people there were all Armenian after they kicked out the Azerbaijanis. And that's how it was for 20 or more years. Just 2 years ago, Azerbaijan retook this territory. Now all the Armenians ran away. Not a single European country, and not even liberal Sweden, has objected to Azerbaijanis moving into this area, saying it's occupied or they're settlers. Though, of course, in a sense, they are settlers. They're settling somewhere.
Resettling.
But not in this, exactly, not in any illegitimate way.
Ulf, I haven't heard it put this quite simple way before, have you?
Well, I'm not a professor of law, so you haven't heard it from me anyway.
No.
But I think what the case that Eugene is making, and what's very important, is that people create thoughts about international law and what's right from a humanitarian or moral point of view, looking at Israel. They don't look at the world. They don't look at different conflicts and different similar, not that there are too many of them, but are similar cases. But all eyes on Israel.
No. I mean, if we didn't have a Jew, then we had to invent one, okay? Just to blame everything on, okay?
I mean, that's in a sense the story of Israel.
Yeah.
The founders of Zionism believed that if the Jews would be removed themselves from Europe, the Europeans would stop being upset about the Jews. But then instead, Israel had to become the Jew of the world.
Yeah, that's all. Now, interesting, because this 19-year perspective of the West Bank that started with ethnic cleansing, and now I mean, nobody talks about that, okay? But we will start talking about that in Sweden. I will. But now we jump to another, but quite near subject, and that's what is happening now with Donald J. Trump in the White House.
I don't personally know.
No, you don't know. But what from your perspective as a professor of international law and what?
I can tell you, in terms of Israel, he is an extraordinary change from President Biden, and you know, we can't even remember how bad it was. It was so bad. in particular, Biden restrained Israel from defending itself against Hamas, which is extraordinary. And Trump has removed those restraints. Trump is obviously seeking to what's called flood the zone. He's doing 1,000 things, some good, some bad, some are going to last, some aren't, with the idea that, he's going to be inherently stymied by resistance within the bureaucracies and from the courts. So he wants to overwhelm the defenses so at least some things can get through. And I think in that sense he's learned a very important lesson from his first term, where he did a little wrong but didn't really succeed in advancing his agenda much. The danger of this strategy is when you're trying to flood the zone of the opposing side, you have to then keep up with your own zone flooding and follow through. And so, there's a lot of policies where it's not clear, what the bandwidth is to follow through.
Okay.
May I interject?
Yeah.
So talking about Donald Trump and the Middle East and Israel, what he did do in his first term was the Abraham Accords. So what do you think, Eugene? Was it a success or not? Or is the jury still out? And do you think there will be other Abraham Accords with, for example, Saudi Arabia? There are, people are saying that Hamas did what they did because they wanted to stop Israel from getting closer to.
So the Abraham Accords have been a success, a great success. And how do we see that? Because they still lasted. They lasted through the war, right? That is to say, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain maintained diplomatic relations and trade with Israel even through the war. So I think that's a real new reality. And, the Abraham Accords, Donald Trump did them, but I think we have to give Barack Obama credit. Barack Obama made them possible. And he made them possible by embracing Iran in a way which terrified the Sunni countries of the region, such that they really had a moment of clarity. And they said, you know what, better Israel than this alternative.
They had their Leo and they had their Straussian moment.
Exactly. And so really, we don't have an Arab world anymore. We have an Iranian axis and a Sunni axis. And I think the Sunni axis is now let me put it this way. When President Trump did one of his other great successes of his first term, recognizing the Golan Heights as
Israeli territory,
more European countries protested than non-Iranian administered Arab countries. So the Arab-Israeli conflict is largely over. What's left now is kind of a Israeli Western Europe ideological conflict. They're going to be the last to be convinced. And I think the Abraham Accords, there's interest in expanding it. Whether that has to include Saudi Arabia is a question. Saudi Arabia wants to charge a very high price, and it's not clear that price is worth it because, a peace treaty with Saudi Arabia, I don't see what it really gives Israel. Israel has now de facto peace with Saudi Arabia, right? That Saudi Arabia is not at war or undermining Israel in the way that it used to in 1948 and thereafter. So the reality now has already been created. I wouldn't pay extra for Saudi membership, but there's other countries that want to sort of show their commitment to these principles, like Azerbaijan, a major Muslim country. I think that would be very valuable.
Okay. Now, because what I could see from another perspective is that I've been for several years working with the Moroccan authorities or government and the Royal Court of Morocco, and they are actually emphasizing their Jewish heritage, actually, very, very much. So I don't know if you follow that today.
I think with Morocco things are basically chill. I think the fact that these relationships stood the test of the war, I think means we can take them as real.
So what's the next country to sign them?
Again, the Abraham Accords is like an idea. Who signs next is somewhat nominal, but I think there's great interest in Azerbaijan doing so. Azerbaijan, is not an Arab country, but it wants to position itself, in this nexus. They have a very favorable policy towards Israel. They want to be closer even to the United States. So I think that's it. And then, similarly, another thing Donald Trump did was, in his first term, was recognize Jerusalem. And everyone said that's crazy, that's like a weird, but ever since there's been a steady drip of more and more countries doing it. Now I think there's close to a dozen. There's European countries, even that have diplomatic premises, like the Czech Republic and Hungary, in Jerusalem. Not embassies, but official diplomatic premises. And I think that also has a momentum that is going to increase.
Mm. And what from my perspective, I've been watching actually focused on what is happening with research and development cooperation and trade. What's your comment about that? How has that developed since the Abraham Accords? Between
the member countries, significantly. I think there's just normal relations. The Emirates is one of the few airlines that didn't stop flying to Israel even during the war. There's a lot of business going back and forth.
Yeah, I think Saudi Arabia, in dental technology, very thorough cooperation. And with the cooperation with Morocco, I mean, it's in food production. Mm-hmm. How to harvest tomatoes in the desert and stuff like that.
Which Morocco is an interesting example, because when Sweden recognized the state of Palestine, which is not a state, a lot of people said, what about Western Sahara? To which, if I recall, the answer of the Swedish government is yes, of course. We're not just making a double standard against the Jews. No. We're now going to go recognize every other place that meets the same test. But they somehow didn't follow through on that.
And I know.
And
it was because I was one of the journalists actually who could prove that the Polisario movement was a part of Al-Qaeda, Akim, Al-Qaeda in Maghreb. And I know that one of my articles, I wrote about it, and it was published or commented in Le Monde. Mm-hmm. And I know that the French Minister of Interior, he was furious about Sweden about to recognize Polisario as a legitimate government of Western Sahara. So he actually confronted his, Swedish counterpart and said, what are you up to, really? If you're doing this, then we will kick you out of the Europol cooperation.
Well, but of course, the Polisario being a terrorist group is a similarity, not a distinction with the PLO.
Yeah, I know. So that's the story about that. So it took them. I read the actual investigation when they had to really analyze how are we going to do this or not. It was a 3-page document, and the ambassador of Morocco said, "Oh, this is not the time and this is not the place to do it." Okay.
Yeah, but now that Sweden has recognized the state of Palestine, I am expecting any day to see them recognize Somaliland and the Druze state in southern Syria and East Turkmen Republic and Kurdistan,
as well,
and Tibet. Okay. But Somaliland is a very real thing.
Yeah,
and I think the Swedes are not going to be the first. Trump was going to be the first.
Yeah, but Somaliland is very, very close to what we consider a democracy.
Yes, it's a well-functioning government which is not a base for extremism like the Mogadishu government.
Back to the Straussian moment and war and peace, and what Thiel, he said that when he actually suggests the Western world to vote for a Christian leadership, and that he has to he's not promoting violence, but he is not backing off violence as a method to protect Christian values.
I haven't read this essay of Thiel. It sounds quite intense.
Yeah, it's intense, but I really. But what is the discussion between? I mean, the use of violence to preserve values. Is there anything kind of...
So in Israel, we don't really have such thoughts or discussions because we're mostly having to use violence to preserve our lives.
Yes, fair enough.
Because Israel is in constant attack and basically much of the population has been in the army for some period over the last 2 years, and because Israel is being attacked, from Gaza, from Lebanon, from Iraq, from everywhere, then we're not having a cultural conversation. We're having an existential. They're not coming to. Of course, they would destroy our values along with our persons, but they are actually coming to physically kill us right now. So the kind of culture Kampf is a bit far removed when you have the actual.
No, if you have a 9mm pointing at your head, I mean, I think you do.
I mean, there are Christians who talk about turning the other cheek that's a value, that's something good. If Israel would use that standard, it wouldn't exist.
Yeah,
so it's something you can say when you're in a powerful situation or in a majority or in a very peaceful context. It's very easy to say, why don't you turn the other cheek? Why do you have to, etc., etc. But Israel is living in a certain reality. And I thought about this because you talked about Thiel and Christian leadership. Well, what does that mean? The values is one thing, and dogma and
the reality is something
there's
else.
not one Christian, I would say. There are so many different Christians, but it's it's important to know that Israel could never work like that because it wouldn't exist. We have to be able to use violence to defend ourselves, and I think most of Christians talking like this wouldn't be shy of using violence if they had to protect themselves or their family or their country. So it's interesting from a Christian point of view. What does this really mean?
That's a good point.
Because you can hear Christian friends of Israel also being a little doubtful, saying, "But do you have to use violence? Why can't you talk and get to know each other?" And this was tried, like Eugene said. What happened on October 7 was that the most friendly-oriented people towards Palestinians were the people that were abducted and massacred and tortured and raped. The most liberal and pro-talk people were the real victims here. All the Israeli society was a victim, honestly speaking. But you know what I mean with this. So
they attacked a dance party, not a synagogue.
I mean, the picture from this young girl being led away with blood all over her. I mean, I feel really like puking. Actually, when I saw.
I mean, we talk in Western Europe. It's from a very luxurious position. Even though Sweden, we have our problems, and many Western countries have problems, but still we're in a luxury situation compared to Israel.
Yeah.
And it's for real. Life is for real, and it's life and death. And we don't have to think like that yet, even though we have the shootings and we have all these problems. But it's not about the country. It's about my personal safety, the safety of my neighborhood, my family. But it's not the country's safety. But in Israel, it's really about the country and the people.
Yeah, but just now to Eugene, I just kind of start wrapping this up, and I would like, because in Sweden we have an international as well. Gaza, what's next?
So what's next? I think nobody knows exactly what's next, and a lot of people ask that question, and I want to go back in history a little bit. If someone said in 1944, Berlin, what's next?
Yeah.
Nobody actually knew what was next. Many people had many different clever plans, which did not come to fruition because in the end, reality is what determines things. I think a couple of things are crucial. For Gaza, first of all, Hamas has to be absolutely destroyed. Destroyed in a manner that would allow a process like denazification to take place. What Hamas says is, look, we're going to surrender, and you can bring in a technocratic government. Why are they ready to do that? Why are they proposing this? Is it because they're ready to have a technocratic government? Is this what they fought and died so hard for? No, because they know technocratic government is people who are going to stand behind their heads with a gun and tell them what to do, just like they've told UNRWA what to do, the relief agencies what to do, and just like Hezbollah has told the Lebanese government what to do. This is a tested model. So Hamas really has to be deeply gone. Again, it would be better if people in Gaza helped more with this effort, but they don't seem inclined to, so Israel is going to have to do it themselves. Also, Gaza, people like to say Gaza is the world's largest open-air prison. Now, that's really not quite right. North Korea is much larger, but the question is, who has the keys to this prison? Who's locking the gates of this prison? And the jailers are Hamas, which keeps its population locked up to use as human shields, and Egypt. Because we look around the world, Syria, millions of refugees, Afghanistan, millions of refugees, Ukraine, 6 million refugees. Where are the refugees from Gaza? They're not allowed out because their people has been weaponized against Israel. As the people are themselves turned into a human shield. And for countries that care about refugee rights and human rights, the fact that not a single Gazan is allowed to escape persecution by Hamas, this horrible conflict, is terrible. So certainly the future has to also involve ending this exceptional, unprecedented practice of having one single population singled out and denied basic rights of refuge and allow them to emigrate and escape the conflict. Surveys today show half of Gazans want to leave. Why is that not a priority for the world?
That's pretty something. That's pretty something. And, Eugene, this was very clarifying.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for your time. And what are you up to now in Stockholm?
So I'm going to be giving a talk today in the Jewish community in the evening, and again have some meetings tomorrow in the parliament, and then on to Copenhagen.
Bon voyage.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time.
Great pleasure. Thank you.